So, if I'm being upfront, I've been procrastinating on this one. I actually put an afternoon aside to write the review for 1981's Bloody Moon, but I'm so genuinely apathetic towards it that I've spent a decent chunk of the time I should have been writing this review instead doing literally anything else. It's not a bad movie, don't get me wrong. It's just that, of all the video nasties out there, this one just sits in the lower middle half of the scale for me. It's a more than reasonable venture, it's just, well, this film's nothing special. It has a lot going for it, but it's just kind of underwhelming. The plot's a bit convoluted. I've tried to get as much detail as I could, but honestly, the film's a bit messy, so if I do go a bit astray, I can only apologise in advance. But the film opens with something of a prologue, as a murder occurs at a nearby disco party. Basically, the partygoers were getting a little too lively and started splitting off to go and have bouncy. But one of the partygoers wasn't really invited. This was Miguel, a scarred man with a mysterious past. The resulting murder winds Miguel up in a mental hospital for 5 years, after which time his sister Manuela arrives at the hospital to take him away as a carer. The hospital staff pretty much tell her that it's fine to take him so long as she makes sure that he avoids any kind of situations that could cause his stress, anger or anxiety to rise, as that may become a trigger for another episode. Which she accepts pretty calmly. Anyway, the pair are heading back to their home via train when they bump into our main character for this film, Angela. Angela is a foreign language student, and she's on the way to a party when Miguel clocks her and the pair exchange glances. This is important to note because that pretty much sets up the rest of the movie. So the school that Angela attends is funded, furnished and partially run by a local countess on the island. And her children are none other than Miguel and Manuela. And there's a little bit of tension here between the pair, as Countess Maria has decided to leave her entire inheritance to Miguel rather than split it evenly. And only adding to the complex nature of the family, there's also some level of incest going on between Manuela and Miguel. Anyway, after a slight delay, Angela finally makes it to the school and her lessons begin. But it only takes a short while for things to start going a bit squiffy. For starters, Miguel realises Angela is attending the school and pretty much starts to stalk her. And shortly after that, women start going missing or end up murdered by a mysterious figure, with Angela being the main witness to at least a couple of the brutal incidents. And only further complicating things, after a time in the classes, we're then introduced to a chap called Antonio, who takes a shine to Angela and who's also tied to Miguel and Manuela in some way. And all this happens right as the killer sets his sights on Angela. In this frankly bloody messy slasher that was too gory for UK audiences, will Angela figure out who the killer is? Will Miguel be able to bang his sister one more time for old time's sake? And why is Antonio the most boring, bland and uninteresting love interest I've ever seen in this genre of filmmaking? Seriously, the guy's as interesting as sand. I'm maybe being a little bit harsh on this one, but honestly, I'm conflicted about exactly how I feel. While it does have a lot of good and entertaining elements going for it, the biggest thing that lets this movie down is the script, which is just so boring. Seriously, it's the most repetitious script I've ever sat through. 90% of the film could be summed up as, we go to a party and a load of girls flirt, fawn and chat about guys in their class, or they talk about their lessons, then we either go back to the dorm rooms or to a side road next to the dorm rooms where we're subjected to a ton of fake-outs, usually with Angela as she wanders around her apartment worried there's a stalker or killer in the house, which is then actually revealed to be someone else from Angela's class who chats to Angela for a bit before leaving and then being murdered by the actual killer. And that's pretty much the entire movie from about 15 minutes in to about 5 minutes off the end. Literally those same beats over and over and over again, very rarely interspersed with 5 minutes of daytime footage of either Miguel or Manuela wandering around their house, or of Angela trying to do a bit of light detective work around the town to see if she can figure out who the killer or stalker is. And that's all this film is, which is just terrifically underwhelming. I mean, the first couple of times it happened, it was just about okay, but by the fourth or fifth loop, you do start to feel a bit like you're being cheated on the purchase because it's just so blatant in its looping. Put it this way, The fact the one non-dorm-based murder scene in this film is by far the most memorable one, it's literally the box art, speaks volumes for the quality of the rest of the film. Structurally as well, the whole thing's pretty much to pot. We have a very fractured introduction to this film, quite why they chose to open with 15 minutes of setting up Miguel in a totally irrelevant backstory piece that just establishes that he killed someone 5 years ago and has just got out of a mental hospital is very bizarre. They don't really even play on the mental hospital angle all that much throughout the film. And the introduction of Angela is super clunky, and there's about a 5 to 10 minute window where, because they've spent so long establishing Miguel and Manuela while not setting up the actual main characters for the film, they have to kind of awkwardly transition away from Miguel's story and into Angela's, whilst also keeping Miguel on the peripheral because he's important to the plot. But not as important as Angela. And given that they go to so much fuss and hassle to establish exactly who Miguel is in the very first 15 to 25 minutes of this film, beyond that point they pretty much just relegate him to stalker for most of the rest of the runtime. The plot's a bit of a weird one too, in the sense that there both is and isn't any kind of development of the narrative really. Like, on a surface level, if I just said a woman gets stalked and her friends are murdered while she attends a foreign language course and eventually they find out who the killer is, you'd think that was reasonable, if not generic. But if I actually cut what's written there out of the movie and reassembled it into its own thing, you'd probably have a 20-minute film, if that. Because while that is the broad plot of the film, nothing related to that actually happens for most of the runtime. Instead, most of the film has a kind of frenetic energy that just sort of hits in 5-minute long chunks at random. So for example, the reveal of the killer, a decent chunk of the murders in the movie, and a more than decent chunk of the stuff I actually liked in this film, is literally in the final 7 minutes of the runtime. You'll sit through 10 minutes of Angela skulking through her apartment in the dark while Miguel looks at her through a window that borders on painful, just to get 3 minutes where Manuela has a massive rant to Miguel about how they need to kill everyone on the island in order to restore their passionate incestuous relationship. It's just, the pacing in this one is beyond weird. But what I will say is that beyond a repetitive, slightly boring and badly paced and structured script is some of the most entertaining dialogue that I have heard in a movie. One critic described it as having a tin ear for dialogue, and I'd resoundingly agree with that. It's hilarious at times, with some really awkward, cringy, and just plain weird dialogue on display. My personal favourite being, I bet he's never even made it with a girl, the phony Spanish lover. There are just tons of examples like this throughout, and each one as they popped up enamoured me to the film more and more. The script was written by Eric Tomek. He has 47 writing credits, mainly for erotic movies. I'd say his most well-known films were this and another video nasty, Contamination. On directing duties, we have the late Jess Franco. And honestly, I don't know where to begin with his work. Do I talk about his 105 acting credits, his 184 writing credits, or his 207 directing credits? And that's before I even get into his 72 composing credits. The guy was a literal machine, and the just over 55 years he worked in the industry, when you're making Roger Corman look like a slacker, you know you're working on a whole other level. Franco's work is generally based in erotic and horror cinema, but he has also dabbled in some action and other types of genre work along the way. If I'm being brutally honest, I've seen about a dozen of his films at this point, and of what I've seen, he's not really my scene. Who knows, maybe I just picked 12 or so of his films that just really didn't gel with me, but from what I've seen, which is probably why it's taken me so long to get around to covering one of his movies. Bloody Moon isn't really a good example of Franco's work. This movie's widely regarded as him working as a gun for hire rather than it being something he was actually interested in. In fact, in interviews, Franco himself admitted that he just took the job for 2 reasons. One being because he thought it would be a quick and easy paycheck, and the other being because the people who hired him told him that Pink Floyd were doing the soundtrack. Which, if you've watched this film, you'll know, turned out to be utter bollocks. Leaning more towards the slasher giallo subgenre, rather than his more traditional erotic horror scene, Bloody Moon from a directorial standpoint I feel is actually pretty decent. I mean, the film may not have a lot to say or do, but it at least looks nice while not saying or doing it. There's some really nice depth of field shots, and Franco really goes to town on close-ups in this, with stabbings, decapitations, and all manner of other grisly goings-on being displayed as up close and personal as it's possible to get. But what I really like about this film's direction is the fact that it actually bothers to experiment with more interesting director-driven cine. With, for example, extreme close-ups of eyes, POV shots, and some damn fine chiaroscuro lit shots, which totally put you in the mood for something a bit mysterious and grisly. Gore isn't generally Franco's wheelhouse, so to see him experiment with it here is frankly a delight. While it may falter a little bit on the editing front due to some rather haphazard cuts in places, there's simply no denying that this isn't a pretty looking film for what it is. And the same can be said for the cine, with a very generous and exquisite selection of shot types being used to build the sequences and some frankly gorgeous and inspired location work on hand. I genuinely loved the look of this movie, the feel. It's just got such a nice colourful palette it's working to, with the lush green locations combining with midnight blue shots to full-blown hammer red blood offsetting things as a contrast. The only criticism I really have for the film visually outside of the editing is the fact that some of the location work done at night is shot a little over dark, to the point that you can't actually see what's even going on, which can be a bit distracting as quite a bit of the film takes place at night. Performance-wise, it's alright. Honestly, as mentioned, I'm not watching this film for the dedicated commitment to nuance here. I'm watching it because the actors say goofy things and act in a weird and goofy way for the majority of the runtime. So no one here exactly thrilled me in terms of delivering a winning performance. The cast direction is pretty decent, but is massively laboured by the repetitive nature of the script, which ultimately holds most of the cast back from ever breaking above campy but acceptable levels of performance. Quite honestly, the script for this film is a bit of a millstone for the production in general. What I can say is that Olivia Pascal delights as Angela in this, giving a great performance as our lead that's engaging and genuinely entertaining for most of the runtime, even if she doesn't get a tremendous amount to do other than wander around her apartment screaming. Credit also has to go to Alanda Wechter and Nadja Gerganoff as Manuela and Miguel respectively. The pair have a great on-screen presence, and Gerganoff in particular has some wonderfully demented lines. Even though I can't hear her original performance, due to the film being dubbed, her physicality throughout the film is easily a highlight for me. Finally, the soundtrack. And this is probably the thing I like the most about this movie. It's a synth rock soundtrack that's got a nice upbeat poppy twist in places, which is then contrasted by a darker, rockier edge during the more horror-driven sequences. Quite honestly, given all the Euro slashers I've seen over the years, I'd say this was arguably one of my favourites. Easily in my top 10, if not top 5, favourite slasher soundtracks of all time. It's distinctive, unique, and just sounds great. Bloody Moon was listed as a video nasty in 1983, and at a glance, I can kinda see why. Apart from the fact the BBFC at the time had a hard rule of no blood on breasts, which is oddly specific, but whatever. The film also featured several rather gory and gruesome attacks and murders, mainly on women, which was something else the BBFC was strongly against at the time. And even now, in the year of our Lord 2022, they get a bit twitchy at violence to women on screen. Since its ban, it's never had a UK re-release uncut, but it did get a US Blu-ray courtesy of Severin Films, which does look quite nice, even if it is a little thin on the ground on the extras front. Bloody Moon was a difficult one for me to process my feelings on, really. It was pretty much a troubled production from the off, with the producers hiring Franco to shoot a horror movie with, quote, 50 or more horror moments, and literally little to nothing else to go on. It left the cast, crew and writer effectively winging it, and while I love the direction, soundtrack and ultra bizarre dialogue, the script is just way too messy for me to really truly get on with. With way too much repetition, a disjointed and awkward intro and outro sequence that doesn't seem to make any sense or go anywhere, while I don't think I'd mind watching this as part of a marathon or if I was channel hopping and it was just there in the background as fodder, I don't think I'd consciously choose to put this one on. If you're big on Euro horror or slasher movies, I'm certain you'll probably love this. But, as it stands, while I can appreciate it, it wasn't really for me.